Welcome back to Wings and Bibles. I'm Dustin, and today we have a juicy one for you. We'll be talking about 6115 and 6123. A little disclaimer, I am not a lawyer and I'm not offering legal advice. If you're looking for legal advice on this subject, I want you to hop over to AOPA and sign up for their pilot protection services. It is a bit expensive at $149 a year just for the basic plan, but the services that they offer is invaluable even if you've already got your license. Think of it as kind of insurance on your certificates. Once you do that, you will have access to this page, and you can call this number right here, 800-872-2672. Just go through the phone menu and set up an appointment to talk with the aviation lawyer. They're very helpful and will clarify any answer that you ask them and will walk you through the specific regulations regarding your situation. I personally have only used them once, and I'm glad I went ahead and paid for their services. A little more on that later. Starting off here, we have 6115, offenses involving alcohol or drugs. A says, a conviction for the violation of any federal or state statute relating to the growing, processing, manufacture, sale, disposition, possession, transportation, or importation of narcotic drugs, marijuana, or depressant or stimulant drugs or substances is grounds for denial of an application for any certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part for a period of up to 1 year after the date of final conviction, or suspension or revocation for any certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part. So it's basically saying anything having to do with drugs is grounds for this. And when it says suspension or revocation of any certificate, I believe it's also referencing your medical certificate, which will become important later. Moving on, committing an act prohibited by 9117A, which is no person may act or attempt to act as a crew member of a civil aircraft within 8 hours after the consumption of any alcohol beverage while under the influence of alcohol, while using any drug that affects the person's faculties in any way contrary to safety, or while having an alcohol concentration of 0.04 or greater in a blood or breath specimen. Alcohol concentration means grams of alcohol per deciliter of blood or grams of alcohol per 210 liters of breath. If you've been around aviation for any period of time, you will have heard this: 8 hours between bottle and throttle. Or 9119A of this chapter, except as provided in paragraph B of this section, no person may operate a civil aircraft within the United States with knowledge that narcotic drugs, marijuana, and depressant or stimulant drugs or substances as defined in federal or state statutes are carried in the aircraft. So this section is saying you can't fly under the influence of alcohol, and you can't knowingly carry drugs on the aircraft. This is grounds for denial of an application for a certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part for a period of up to 1 year after the date of the act, or suspension or revocation of any certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part. Section C says, for the purposes of paragraphs D, E, and F of this section, a motor vehicle action means, so they're going to give a few definitions of a motor vehicle action for these paragraphs, D, E, and F. A conviction after November 29, 1990 for the violation of any federal or state statute relating to the operation of a motor vehicle while intoxicated by alcohol or a drug, while impaired by alcohol or a drug, or while under the influence of alcohol or a drug. The cancellation, suspension, or revocation of a license to operate a motor vehicle after November 29, 1990 for a cause related to the operation of a motor vehicle while intoxicated by alcohol or a drug, while impaired by alcohol or a drug, or while under the influence of alcohol or a drug, or the denial after November 29, 1990 of an application for a license to operate a motor vehicle for a cause related to the operation of a motor vehicle while intoxicated by alcohol or a drug, while impaired by alcohol or a drug, or while under the influence of alcohol or a drug. Except for a motor vehicle action that results from the same incident or arises out of the same factual circumstances, a motor vehicle action occurring within 3 years of a previous motor vehicle action is grounds for. So they're saying any other motor vehicle action besides the first circumstance occurring within 3 years of a previous motor vehicle action is grounds for, once again, denial of an application for any certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part for a period of up to 1 year after the date of the last motor vehicle action, or suspension or revocation of any certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part. This next section is stating what needs to be done if you are convicted of some type of DUI, WI. Each person holding a certificate issued under this part shall provide a written report of each motor vehicle action to the FAA, Civil Aviation Security Division, P.O. Box 25810, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma 73125, not later than 60 days after the motor vehicle action. The report must include the person's name, address, date of birth, and airman certificate number, the type of violation that resulted in the conviction or the administrative action, the date of the conviction or administrative action, the state that holds the record of conviction or administrative action, and a statement of whether the motor vehicle action resulted from the same incident or arose out of the same factual circumstances related to a previously reported motor vehicle action. Failure to comply with paragraph E, which is this one here, of this section is grounds for, once again, denial of application for any certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part for a period of up to 1 year after the date of the motor vehicle action, or suspension or revocation of any certificate, rating, or authorization issued under this part. Now, if you are convicted of a DUI or DWI, this is the notification letter that you need to submit to the FAA. And how you get it is you enter your email address and submit to receive an email with a link to access the notification letter form. I would have put my email in there and showed you the actual example, but I'm a bit afraid of the FAA putting me on some type of list. Now, the regulations are pretty clear that if you are convicted of any drug or alcohol offense, it is grounds for one of these things. But it's not all doom and gloom, because there is a path for you to get your pilot's license. Because the problem really isn't the conviction, it's the ability to get a medical that would prevent you from getting your pilot's license. Now, that's at least what the lawyer told me from AOPA. And this is one of the documents that the lawyer sent me. The drug use, past or present, disposition table. So if you see here, we have condition, evaluation data, and disposition. So there's a box for issue and defer of a medical. So condition, history of drug use, drug-related events, or drug dependence, illicit or prescription. So this is referencing marijuana, if you're alcoholic, or you took some type of medicine, let's say for ADHD. If this has been previously reported to the FAA and written proof from the FAA that monitoring is not required, then you can move on to the next step, evaluation. The airman should bring his/her letters from the FAA for this condition for the AME to review. The AME should review the letter and obtain any additional history necessary from the airman to verify no subsequent events have occurred. If the airman is required to remain abstinent, which is usually the case, The AME, based on their clinical assessment, should note in Block 60 if the airman is adhering to the requirement. So if all that has been done, then you can move on to the disposition. Annotate Block 60 with the date of the most recent event and if there have been no further events or changes in condition. So basically the AME is going to evaluate you and decide what needs to go on this Block 60. This document is really for the AME, but it's good to know anyways. Now on the other hand, if any event in the airman's lifetime that has not yet been cleared by the FAA and given an eligibility letter. So if it hasn't been cleared by the FAA, then you have to submit the following for FAA review. Airman statement that describes all the following: the primary drug used, what type of drug did you use, any additional drugs, substances used in the airman's lifetime. This includes marijuana, even if allowed in some states, illicit drugs, prescription medications, or others. Next, you're going to describe for each use how much you used it, how much you used, the setting in which used, and the dates use started and stopped. Did you attend any treatment programs? If yes, provide beginning and end dates. If no, this should be stated. Did any economic, legal problems, or otherwise adverse consequences come from use? And the outcome will be submit the information to FAA for review, and follow-up issuance will be per the airman's authorization letter. And once again, I am not a lawyer, so talk to a lawyer to help you with your specific situation if you are in this kind of situation. And this brings me into the next part of this video, which is 6123, medical certificates, requirement and duration. So this section goes into what you need to qualify for a medical, what type of operations and what type of medical you need. So section A says, operations requiring a medical certificate, except as provided in paragraphs B and C of this section, a person must hold a first-class medical certificate when exercising the pilot and command privileges of an airline transport pilot certificate. When exercising the second in command privileges of an airline transport pilot certificate in a flag or supplemental operation in Part 121 of this chapter that requires 3 or more pilots, or when serving as a required pilot flight crew member in an operation conducted under Part 121 of this chapter, if the pilot has reached his or her 60th birthday. You must hold at least a second-class medical certificate when exercising second in command privileges of an airline transport pilot certificate in Part 121 of this chapter, other than operations specified in paragraph A.1.2 of this section. Privileges of a commercial pilot certificate in an aircraft other than a balloon or glider, or except as provided in paragraph B5 of this section, privileges of a commercial pilot certificate with a balloon class rating for compensation or higher. You must hold at least a third-class medical certificate when exercising the privileges of a private pilot certificate, recreational pilot certificate, or student pilot certificate, except when operating under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61.113, which is a private pilot may act as pilot in command or serve as a required flight crew member of an aircraft without holding a medical certificate issued under Part 67, provided the pilot holds a valid U.S. driver's license, meets the requirements of 6123, and complies with this section and all the following conditions and limitations. And we'll go into this later in a different video, because that is basic med and there's a lot of confusion about that. When exercising the privileges of a flight instructor certificate and acting as the pilot in command or as a required flight crew member, except when operating under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61.113I. So I'm a flight instructor and I have a third-class medical. So that's just a real life example. When taking a practical test in an aircraft for a recreational pilot, private pilot, commercial pilot, or airline transport pilot certificate, or for a flight instructor certificate, except when operating under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61.113. So if you're taking a practical test, doesn't matter what type of practical test, for whatever certificate, you only need a third class medical. You also need a third class medical when performing the duties as an examiner in an aircraft when administering a practical test or proficiency check for an airman certificate, rating, or authorization, except when meeting the requirements to operate under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61.113I. So if you're a DPE, you only need a third class medical. So now we're getting to the section where you don't require a medical certificate. A person is not required to hold a medical certificate when exercising the privileges of a student pilot certificate. So if you're trying to get a certificate or rating, you don't need a medical certificate. A sport pilot certificate with glider or balloon privileges, or a pilot certificate with glider category rating or balloon class rating. So if you're a student pilot for one of these ratings, you don't need a medical certificate. When exercising the privileges of a sport pilot certificate with privileges in a glider or balloon, so if you already have those certificates and you're actively exercising those privileges of that certificate, you don't need a medical certificate. When exercising the privileges of a pilot certificate with a glider category rating in a glider, when exercising the privileges of a private pilot certificate with a balloon class rating in a balloon, when exercising the privileges of a commercial pilot certificate with a balloon class rating in a balloon if the person is providing flight training in accordance with 61.133 A2II, when exercising the privileges of a flight instructor certificate with a sport pilot rating in a glider or balloon or glider category rating, when exercising the privileges of a flight instructor certificate if the person is not acting as pilot in command or serving as a required pilot flight crew member, when exercising the privileges of a ground instructor certificate, when serving as an examiner or check airman and administering a practical test or proficiency test for an airman certificate, rating, or authorization conducted in a glider, balloon, flight simulator, or flight training device. When taking a practical test or a proficiency test, check for a certificate, rating, authorization, or operating privilege conducted in a glider, balloon, flight simulator, or flight training device. When a military pilot of the U.S. Armed Forces can show evidence of an up-to-date medical examination authorizing pilot flight status issued by the U.S. Armed Forces and the flight does not require higher than a third-class medical certificate and the flight conducted is a domestic flight operation within United States airspace. Or when exercising the privileges of a student pilot certificate or higher while acting as pilot in command on a special medical flight test authorized under Part 67 of this chapter. Next, we have operations requiring either a medical certificate or a U.S. driver's license. A person must hold and possess either a medical certificate issued under Part 67 of this chapter or a U.S. driver's license when exercising the privileges of a student pilot certificate while seeking sport pilot privileges in a light sport aircraft other than a glider or balloon, exercising the privileges of a sport pilot certificate in a light sport aircraft other than a glider or balloon, exercising the privileges of a flight instructor certificate with a sport pilot rating while acting as pilot in command or serving as a required flight crew member of a light sport aircraft other than a glider or balloon, serving as an examiner and administering a practical test for the issuance of a sport pilot certificate in a light sport aircraft other than a glider or balloon, exercising the privileges of a student, recreational, or private pilot certificate if that flight is conducted under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61.113I, exercising the privileges of a flight instructor certificate and acting as the pilot in command or as a required flight crew member if the flight is conducted under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61.113I, or serving as an examiner and administering a practical test or proficiency check for an airman certificate, rating, or authorization if the flight is conducted under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61-113I. A person using a U.S. driver's license to meet the requirements of paragraph C while exercising sport pilot privileges must comply with each restriction and limitation imposed by that person's U.S. driver's license and any judicial or administrative order applying to the operation of a motor vehicle. So basically saying if your U.S. driver's license says you need glasses, then you have to have glasses in the plane. Have been found eligible for the issuance of at least a third-class airman medical certificate at the time of his or her most recent application, if the person has applied for a medical certificate. So to operate using only a U.S. driver's license, you need to have been found eligible for the issuance of at least a third-class airman medical. Not have his or her most recently issued medical certificate if the person has held a medical certificate, suspended or revoked, or most recent authorization for a special issuance of a medical certificate withdrawn. And not know or have any reason to know of any medical condition that would make the person unable to operate a light sport aircraft in a safe manner. So if you have any condition and it hasn't been reported, you can't fly that aircraft if it makes you unable to fly that aircraft. A person using a U.S. driver's license to meet the requirements of paragraph C while operating under the conditions and limitations of 61-113I, which is basic med, must meet the following requirements. The person must comply with all medical requirements or restrictions associated with his or her U.S. driver's license. At any point after July 14, 2006, have held a medical certificate issued under Part 67 of this chapter. So you have to have a medical certificate after that time. Complete the medical education course set forth in 68.3 of this chapter during the 24th calendar months before acting as pilot in command or serving as a required flight crew member in an operation conducted under 61-113, and retain a certification of course completion in accordance with 68.3b1 of this chapter. Receive a comprehensive medical examination from a state licensed physician during the 48 calendar months before acting as a pilot in command or serving as a required flight crew member of an operation conducted under 61-113I, and that medical examination is conducted in accordance with requirements in Part 68 of this chapter. If the individual has been diagnosed with any medical condition that may impact the ability of the individual to fly, be under the care and treatment of a state licensed physician when acting as pilot in command or serving as a required flight crew member of an operation conducted under 61-113I. In addition, the most recently issued medical certificate may include an authorization for special issuance, may be expired, and cannot have been suspended or revoked. The most recently issued authorization for a special issuance of a medical certificate cannot have been withdrawn, and the most recent application for an airman medical certificate submitted to the FAA cannot have been completed and denied. So before we move on to duration of a medical certificate, I want to point something out in Part 67. Part 67 is Medical Standards and Certification. This part is for AMEs, not necessarily for pilots, but it is good to know. These are the medical standards that the AME is looking for to determine if he's going to issue you your medical certificate. Now this goes through eye standards, ear, nose, throat, and equilibrium, mental standards, a bunch of medical stuff that the AME is looking for. So going back to duration of a medical certificate, I really like this table. I believe in previous editions of the FAR, this table was located somewhere strange in the FAR. It was really hard to find sometimes, but I'm glad it's here. So if you read through this table, you'll see it says if you hold, and then it describes the type of medical certificate. And then the next column is, and on the date of examination for your most recent medical certificate, you were, and then describes your age. And then it describes the kind of operation that you're looking to do. And then it describes when your medical certificate expires. So if I hold a first class medical and I'm under the age of 40 and I'm exercising the privileges of an airline transport pilot certificate for pilot in command privileges or for second in command privileges in a flag or supplemental operation in Part 121 requiring 3 or more pilots, then my medical certificate expires 12th month after the month of the date of examination shown on the medical certificate. And something you'll hear when talking about medicals is calendar months. So for example, if I got my examination today is 1/28, my first class medical wouldn't expire until next year, January 31st. Now, if I was over the age of 40 and I was exercising the privileges after this, the same privileges of this, my medical will expire after 6 months. And at any age, a commercial pilot certificate, other than a commercial pilot certificate with a balloon rating when conducting flight training, a flight engineer certificate, or an air traffic controller tower operator certificate, my first class medical would expire on the 12th month after the month of the date of examination. So we'll skip down to my scenario. So let's see. All right, I want to try to get a third class medical. All right, and then I am under the age of 40, and I want to exercise the privileges of a flight instructor. So my medical would expire on the 60th month after the month of the date of examination shown on the medical certificate. So my medical would expire in 5 years if I were to get it today. And now I want you to come to this website, go through this table, and try to determine what class of medical you would need and how long it would last depending on your age. And that pretty much does it for 6115 and 6123. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next video. See ya!